Welcome to the Twin Cities Zine Fest 2020 workshop/panel, Ritual Creativity and the Benefits of Consistency. I'm Aaron King, they, them, and with me...
I'm Allison and also they, them.
We're just going to talk about...
on zine making a little bit, which is something that I've always wanted to do since I was younger, but kind of talked myself out of a lot. I think just kind of a nervousness about getting started, which is funny because it's such a welcoming community.
Allison, do you want to say a little bit just about your work and your consistency in work?
Past couple years. In terms of scheduling, I'm kind of despite being a freelancer who runs on deadlines, I also, for myself, I kind of keep more of like a loose schedule so I don't get too stressed out if I don't meet a certain goal or whatever, unless it's absolutely necessary and deadline driven. But I kind of set some loose ideas for what I might want to accomplish in a week and then kind of per day. And it's usually pretty general. I often just, like, I'll wake up, I get dressed, I find that, like, actually getting dressed, even though I don't leave my house anymore, because of the pandemic, helps me concentrate and focus a lot more. And then I just kind of get started on whatever I want to work on for the day. I'm a mail artist, a collage artist, and a graphic designer. I also make some zines. And all of that kind of bleeds together, but I find that there are days where I really want to focus on mail art. There are days where I want to focus more on collage. It kind of depends. So I don't know. I guess it's not a super firm schedule, but I often do start the day with an idea of something I want to finish. Whether it actually has like a solid deadline or kind of a more arbitrary one.
My scheduling and regularity is just tricking myself to keep going.
That's relatable.
Yeah, and then I usually try, like, by the time dinner time rolls around, I usually try to be done. Like, I'll allow myself to go back to work, but, I mean, if I have a good idea, but I cut it off then, and then that's like, I go for a walk. I do go for a walk every day, which helps, especially if I'm, like, stuck or getting antsy. But then I try to leave the nighttime to, like, that's when I can call my friends, or that's when I can play a video game or read a comic or something, so.
A lot of your work, as it seems to me, is more writing-based than mine is. Well, at least in that I really don't do any writing at all. I find that it's easy for me to multitask, like have something on, like a movie or whatever, or talk to a friend, and so I don't need to necessarily like dedicate parts of my day to sort of like not having those kinds of interruptions. With your writing and whatnot, is that something that you need a lot of your own, like a lot of focus for, like your full focus?
I think so. Like, I can't have podcasts on. My phone is almost always on silent, like not even vibrate. So I will, like, Google Hangouts up or something, and my close friends know that if they need me, like, that's usually a better way to reach me during the day. But I do kind of have to go full down. But I can also then switch. I mean, I can do a couple hours of writing and then switch to layout, which does not require that full brain. And then I can, check my phone or chat with someone while I'm doing that.
I find it really challenging at times to switch from one type of task to another. And it's something that in my graphic design career, when I was working in like offices or for more of like an agency type setting versus primarily freelance, which is what I do now, I had to get really good at that kind of switching from task to task. But when I'm sort of determining my own time or my own day, I like to sort of focus on one thing for most of the day, or maybe two things and split the day in half, like kind of spend the morning on something and then the afternoon or evening on something else. Once I feel like it's come to a certain point of completion. But I've definitely found that there's something about constantly pushing myself into other tasks and having to like flip, but pushing myself to switch is kind of difficult at times. Some days I'm better at it than others, so it's interesting to hear. It sounds like you're able to do it a lot more throughout the day than I am. If I'm working on like mail art or getting back to some correspondence or something like that, it's usually like most of a day, and then I might not work on it for another couple days, just because it's a different type of process than when I'm working on collage.
That's
I don't know.
interesting. I think we'll talk about it more a little later, but like a lot of my working methods are based around like my very solitary life. And like I don't work a lot with other people, and I kind of put stuff out on my own schedule, and so that allows me to jump around. It's kind of a privilege of mine.
A question we received from Hannah, Easeful Death, is how do you file and schedule things? How do you stay organized?
I think you should answer that first because you work more physically, and to me that makes it a lot harder to file and organize things. So I would love to hear your answer.
Well, I'm a little bit of a disorganized person. I have a really kind of I was about to say an interesting tension between being extremely disorganized but also a good project manager. But I don't know that it actually is interesting. I think it's just like a symptom of my like quirky brain and just kind of some of my mental health stuff that I have going on. I am not very physically organized. I do. I basically live in my studio. My living space is my studio space, and I have it spread out pretty much everywhere. And as a collage artist and like a mixed media artist, you if it's your primary medium, I mean that stuff is just everywhere. I just have piles of weird paper junk like everywhere. So I don't think for my personal like collage work, I don't really think that I keep it that organized. I keep all my finished originals in one place, but as far as materials go, I don't know. I just kind of like stack them up like wherever, and then I kind of just know where. You know, I have my own like mental system. For design work, I would say it's easier for me to keep kind of like my digital stuff more organized. And I create, you know, like folders for each project. I tend for my personal work, my personal like digital files, I tend to create like a folder per year, and then I organize things by month or however I'm defining time. Like I've been keeping everything in this quarantine folder for the past 6 or 7 months, everything that I've made in quarantine. So all my like scans from just this period of time, because of course in March we didn't know how long we still don't know how long it's gonna last, but
right.
we didn't know if we all were going to be going back to work in a month or what. So I kind of wanted to keep that separate from anything else that I was working on in 2020. I kind of just file things or organize things however it makes sense to me at the time, which is a little annoying when you're trying to go back and find certain things, I suppose, if you haven't kept it all that organized. Scheduling, if I have something that has a fixed deadline, whether it's like design or art oriented, I just build myself a production schedule, like working backwards. That was a skill that I learned, you know, in the early part of my graphic design career, because I was working in print on publications that had a really, really, really tight production schedules that were very, very stressful, which helped me learn like a good way for my brain, the way I personally work, to kind of like work backwards and make that schedule. So I just kind of figure out how much time I think I'll need to get something done, especially because I know that I can get stressed out easily. And right now I have kind of the luxury of having a lot of time because I don't have another job. It's kind of all, freelance and personal projects right now. I don't know. I just kind of work backwards and make a schedule depending on what I'm working on.
My answers are short. I have a folder on my desktop called Collage, and there's like 500, 500 JPEGs in there, all with the randomized file names from wherever I downloaded them. And then I have a folder called D&D Zines, which is all my InDesign files and PDFs. I hate it, but I didn't realize I hated it until it was too big. Now I would have to spend so much time going back and fixing it, which I'm sure I eventually will. But for now, it's just kind of a toy box.
Where do you pull your images from? Well, I know you mostly work with public domain type stuff, but what are some sources?
Yeah.
If you'd like to reveal your...
Oh, absolutely. They're not mine. They're there for everyone. The British Library has a Flickr account that is really well... the metadata there is really good. It's easy to search. I get a lot from there. The Met just put up a public domain section, like made it easier to find stuff that you can use freely and without attribution, which you can find on their website. I do occasionally, not as often, but like I'll scan stuff out of old books, especially like marbling and old photos and stuff. That's about it. There's a Twitter account, I think, called the Public Domain Review, which is a journal that publishes articles about public domain images and texts. But then they also have a little library of high-res stuff that you can get. And that's kind of all.
Yeah, they're a really great resource.
How about you? You work in paper. You work in physical stuff.
I'll use just about any kind of paper. I've been collecting stuff for a long time. I wanted to do more with collage well before I actually got into collage because it seemed very difficult to me to start, which you might be getting sort of like a idea of how I set myself up for failure sometimes. I think that something is too hard or that I'm not good enough. But at the same time, I'm a very like self-motivated and self-taught person, so I don't know. It's like these two. Maybe it's because I'm a Gemini. I don't know. Just blame it on that.
It's interesting. Right? I feel like we've both told each other that we got into collage because we wanted to be illustrators, but felt that we weren't good enough.
That's true. We have had this conversation before. I did used to mainly draw. I wanted to work in illustration and ended up discovering in my 30s that collage was like this great passion that I didn't know I had, I guess. I'll use just about anything. A lot of people in my life know if they have a stack of something that they don't want anymore, like magazines, or whatever, old books, to just call me because I probably want them. And if I can't use them, or if they're not something that I specifically want to use, I'll take them because I want to redistribute them to other people because, it's, there's so much out there on the internet. And I have done some digital collage in the past, just for kind of more in a graphic design context. But it's just such a different experience to have to actually go chasing something specific that you want to use, or to sort of work within the parameters of what you can find. And it's so much, just uses this different part of my brain than when I have to work on graphic design, like digital tasks, that I really like that. So over the years, obviously, like I've discovered that like certain materials, certain types of paper, certain eras of printing more than others. But when it comes right down to it, I'll use just about whatever. Sometimes when I go on vacation, if I can find like free magazines or whatever, just like tourist type stuff, I'll I'll limit myself to using those and try to make some work that's just from that material, things like that. Because you just get different results, and you try different things, and you come to different conclusions you might not have gotten to if you had stayed working in kind of your default approach. So I don't know. Yeah, I get stuff from garage sales, from friends, thrift stores. I don't know. You just end up, especially when something is free, you would just end up with something with stuff that you might not have picked up if you had seen it in a thrift store and had to pay money for it. Which is also an interesting way to start thinking outside the box. Try some different things. So, but I also, I always am collecting material for Twin Cities Collage Collective. Quite a bit of the stuff that we have at our free events, which are currently on pause due to the pandemic, are just like things that I find or acquire. Everyone contributes, but that's how we get quite a bit of stuff to provide to people, because collage is it can be very accessible, but you have to have the material to do it, and it does take time to acquire that material. So try to be a hub for that. That kind of leads into a question that Agatha Caspian the Strange on Instagram asked. How do you feel that technological advances have changed collage or zine making? Anyone can create and print basically anything on many types of paper or material these days. Do you have any feelings about that, Aaron?
I don't know. I immediately got defensive when I read that question, because there's like, because I'm not saying that this is the intent of asking that question, but I feel like I see people ask those kinds of questions with a kind of vague nostalgia of like, in the old days you really had to work to make these things, and now it's so easy. Kids these days, blah blah blah, which is not in this question anywhere. Like I said, all in my head. But I feel like people said a lot of similar things, like when desktop publishing first came around and everyone did have access to word processing and layout technology and home printers and stuff. And to me, like, that was a golden age of zine making, because all of a sudden you didn't necessarily have to pay or have a friend at Kinko's. You could print stuff off on a school printer or whatever. So I'm always for more access, which a lot of technology has given. Not that technology is always good, but I like the idea that if someone maybe doesn't have room to store materials, they can still start digitally and mess around without worrying about like ruining something or miscutting it, gluing it poorly, which are all things I have done.
Same.
But at the same time, I'm not saying that that is the best way to do it or the way that people should be doing it. I actually, like, a lot of why I quit trying to draw is because I didn't have a place that I could permanently set stuff up in. So every time I wanted to do it, I would have to drag out all my materials and like kind of create a space to do that in. And now working digitally, I can just turn on the computer, and that's a lot easier for me.
That makes sense. Yeah, like access and accessibility in terms of materials, but also like ADA type accessibility. All of that is really interesting. And it's really interesting that you had that reaction to that question, because Agatha, the person who asked it, is someone that I know, and she works in a lot of kind of like folk art traditions, and she does a lot of embroidery and other things like that. So when I read that question, having the context that I have, that's got me thinking, if I didn't have that context, I probably would have felt kind of similarly, because there is kind of this, oh, well, anyone can do that now because of technology, and it was so much harder, or you had to have more skill, or XYZ, whatever. Kind of gatekeepy, weird stuff.
Right.
Yeah, no, it's super interesting. I think about the technological advances as it relates to things like layout and graphic design a lot. I am starting a couple projects right now with a couple friends who are photographers, where I'm going to print or have prints made of some of their work to cut up and probably do a couple zines where we display the original images and then my reformulations of the images. But I don't go and look for public domain stuff and print it out and cut it up. I kind of keep that separate, just because it's just, I don't know, it's just the method that I use. It's not like it's not because I'm like some kind of weird like analog purist or something. But I totally agree that the digital has opened up so many options. I do zine layouts in InDesign. I don't usually do the, like hand assembled layouts, because I guess that's where that's where it ends for me, because it gets into my graphic design world and all the print stuff that I do, and so I'll do quite a bit of it analog, and then I'll take it and do the final layout in InDesign.
There are so many things that I have quit or given up on because I couldn't get it to look the way I wanted, and digital lets me do that a little more, I think.
Oh, a question also from Agatha, Caspian the Strange, that I was also wondering about with regards to your process. Do you limit yourself to a certain amount of material when you're working on graphics or digital collage? Do you have like a filing system for specific types of imagery and colors? Do you often go and look for certain... Do you kind of conceptualize something ahead of time and then work from it? Because it strikes me that a lot of your collage work that I've seen, you're kind of specifically trying to illustrate something that you've already written. I don't know if that's completely correct, but that's what it seems.
I will do, this is again like a fun division of labor that I do to keep myself from quitting. Like a lot of times I might have something in mind when I go to look for materials, but then that just becomes a little research trip, and I spend an hour or two messing with search terms and downloading different images. And then a lot of times when it comes to actually making something out of the source materials, I will not go looking for something. I'll confine myself to what I already have. That just helps stave off, the fear of infinity and the fear of choice paralysis and stuff like that. And it is, oftentimes I'm trying to make an image of something that I have already written about, but equally I will start an image and it will not look at all like what I was going for, and then I'll just go back and change the text because I'm a cheater.
I don't think that makes you a cheater. That's cool.
But there is, like working with public domain stuff that you find via libraries and museums that usually ends like in the 1980s at the latest. A lot of that stuff is from early to mid 1900s. A lot of it is American and British. And so there is kind of an aesthetic to it that forces itself onto the work because you're only working with so many source materials. So I do have a general kind of lane that I know aesthetically to stay in when I'm writing or trying to compose something to go with an image.
That's super interesting. Do you sometimes go and save a lot of stuff in your folder, your one folder, ahead of time?
My toy box. Yeah. It's like, I call it like my trip to the content mines. Like I just go digging for the content, and, I'll maybe use half of what I download in collages, and then I use the other half as like reaction images on Twitter, because I think it is much funnier to react with like a 19th century etching about the value of temperance than like a GIF from a movie. So I get different.
You do have a good Twitter presence.
Thank you. I get different uses. Yeah.
That's really funny.
How about you? What was even the question?
One
What was the original
I
question? Do you limit yourself? Is that the one? Do you limit yourself to a certain amount of
Yeah,
material?
do you limit yourself to a certain amount of material? I It depends. It really depends what I'm working on. It depends how much time I feel like I have, and like how large the piece I'm working on is, and kind of like what the purpose is. I've collected a lot of paper material, as I mentioned at this stage. I have a pretty large pool of stuff, which can be overwhelming, especially because I don't know. Sometimes I pull stuff out and I'll just throw it in a bin. Just like flip through it until I see something that I like. I have in the past filed things by color, especially a couple years ago when I was doing more of these kind of like abstract collage like forms that were just like floating in space, and I often would just make them without even thinking what I was going to put them on in terms of a background. I would Around that time I often would file things by color because I sometimes was looking for a certain tone, and that would save me time down the line. I usually start with maybe an era of material in mind that I want to pull from, like do I want to work from older books and magazines, or do I want to work from contemporary material? I don't often mix things in terms of era like too much because the print quality is so different. Like I mentioned before, sometimes I'll come up with an idea for myself of like, oh, I'm only going to use things that I found on this trip. Whatever I find, whatever I want to use, there is no limitation. It kind of just depends on the project or how I'm feeling, or if I want to challenge myself. I'm trying to open it up and let myself really like play and explore different types of things. I don't have to have a cohesive style.
This is from Archie Bongiovanni, famed local zinester and cartoonist. Anyway, check out Archie's stuff. They do Grease Bats, which is a comic on Autostraddle that is so good. But they asked, when did you notice you needed to create a habit, and what were the steps you put into place to build it? Was it gradual or a big change to your structure all at once?
Do you want to start with this one?
Well, I was hoping you would. That's why I asked it. But I can try. It's up to you. Whatever you want.
I thrive on a little bit of structure, but not too much structure. I have learned a lot in the past couple years about what will like totally jam my brain. In 2015, I started freelancing only, and I left my graphic design job. That was a great way to learn what makes sense for me, or what I kind of need to do to make that happen. Kind of like I mentioned before, it's helpful for me if I can make a production schedule for something that leaves me some wiggle room for days where my brain is just like not going to work well. I think I realized that I needed to come up with some kind of plan or skills for that when I just realized that there are just times where I'm not going to be able to get something done because I'm like depressed. Yeah, I think to build the steps to create a habit, I just sort of identified what the goal was and worked backwards. That's really how I approach things. And I don't know, I don't feel like I have a really like all that great of an answer. I do really poorly with huge changes or crises. Therefore, I did not make a big change. I don't make big changes to my personal structure or my personal approach unless I absolutely have to, unless it's like necessitated by external factors. And so bit by bit, I've kind of figured out that like working a little bit every day on something is helpful for me. Making a goal for what I want to get done per day or per week, that's like the right amount of loose versus specific is good for me. I don't know.
I remember just a super specific moment in like 2009 or so where I was like, I have to treat this like a job. Like if I'm ever going to do anything with it. I grew up in a small town, and like, you know, the internet was not a thing until I was in my teens, and then I went to college in a town of 5,000, which was also small, and I feel like I had a great grounding in like reading different kinds of literature and this guy in high school was in a punk band and gave me zines, and that was great. But I just didn't know. I knew I wanted to do something creative, but I just didn't know what. I didn't know how to start. I didn't know how to finish. I just didn't know how to like create a process. And so I remember this very specific time. I was working like 2 or 3 jobs. I had this very sort of Protestant work ethic of just like doing the work on its own is like enough, and it's a value to work hard or something. And I thought, this is my time. Like, I have enough money to just kind of live on these with these jobs I have. Like, I need to start treating this like a job. And so I did start with just like 2 hours every day trying to do something, like approach the blank page and work on it. And it might be writing, it might be editing, but just doing it, and doing it with like a small finished product in mind. And I made a lot of stuff that was garbage, and I still make a lot of stuff that's garbage, but parsing it out into a unit, both of like time that you're working on it during the day and I will make a finished thing, made things so much easier for me. And before that I was just like, sure, I'll write a novel, and I would write 1,000 words and then just not know what to do. But just saying, 800 words or 10 pages. And in the end, I will print it. And even if I don't give it to anyone, no one else sees it, those 8 printed pages is a limit that helped me work toward it. And since then, it's just been kind of expanding that time per day or per week, making sure I still have it regardless of what else is going on in my life. Keeping that, I don't want to say sacred, but keeping it real and keeping it blocked off. And like you, at one point I was a copywriter for a place that made websites. And I just saw even more, like just selfish bad writing every day that I was editing and putting out. And part of me was like, well, if this is their job, if these people are getting paid, and part of their job is making this stuff that is really bad, like, I can also just make bad stuff and hopefully learn something from that process, but like, it doesn't have to be a permanent thing. But the doing of it, the spending of that time is helpful to me, both in feeling like I'm getting better and in just wanting that to be how I spend my days.
My graphic design career definitely is what helped me develop those skills in a different way versus when I was in college. Like you, I also tried a few different things in college and dropped out a couple times. Just, I guess, amusing. I didn't go to school for graphic design. My background is in American studies and gender studies, so like cultural and media studies, basically. It's weird that I ended up in a very deadline-driven job. A lot of what you're saying is making me think about. I don't think that there was a point that I could like identify the way that you can, where I was like, oh, I need to break things into more digestible bits for me, like, to actually accomplish them, because so much of my past with creative stuff is wrapped up in this feeling of feeling like I can't, or like I shouldn't, like I wasn't good enough, or that I didn't have anything to really say and therefore I shouldn't try. Just showing up to your process and pushing through it even on the hard days. Maybe not to the point where you're like distressed or uncomfortable, but I just realized that was kind of the only way I was going to start being able to prioritize this stuff that I was really passionate about and get over some of my, or start to cope with some of my fears or worries about it. And just giving myself permission to make mistakes. And where that really started happening for me is when I started to get involved in mail art or correspondence art, because it's so focused on like exchange and connection and reusing things and making, just sort of making it work and kind of problem solving in different creative ways, because you're not just making like an artwork, you're also making an object that serves a purpose, and its purpose is going through the mail and being able to survive going through the mail. I've definitely had some stuff chewed up.
No.
Which is interesting and fun. You have to literally let go of this thing, no matter how hard you've worked on it, no matter how much time you've spent, by putting it in the mail, it's going to be changed by that process. The machine might eat it. It might get lost. It might get water damaged. I think that was a moment or a period in time where I started to learn or figure out that I had to apply some of this stuff to other creative areas of my life if I ever wanted to get really serious about it.
Oh, I also wanted to say, like, your idea of digestible chunks is so real.
I wish I'd come up with a better way to say it.
I love it. No, it's perfect. Well, it is perfect because it made me think of the cartoonist Noelle Stevenson, who did Lumberjanes and She-Ra, tweeted something about, like, I have always hated doing dishes all my life, to the point where, like, if I've been in relationships or lived with people, it's become a problem. I just got stressed out even thinking about it. And then one day I realized it's because I hate touching wet food. And then I bought some gloves, and now I can do dishes all the time, and all that stress is gone. And I think when I've had problems with working on something in the past, it's because I haven't broken it down into those chunks and haven't been able to figure out which of those chunks is like stymieing me and which one is exciting me. And the more time I spend kind of breaking a project down or breaking an approach down into just the menial physical actions that I have to do of, like, sitting at this desk, finding those little pieces and figuring out the best ways to line them up so that I can just go and feel okay about it.
Yeah, that resonates with me. Yeah, a lot. I have a very similar experience. Making sure that I eat and drink, making sure that I sleep, and figuring out different ways to kind of make sure the baseline is met. I definitely have realized in the past, I would say probably 5-6 years especially, that I was very, very much buying into the narrative that things had to be done a certain way as an artist, as a person, in terms of gender, all kinds of things. I was very, very, very plugged into that. Figuring out that doesn't really matter how you get there. Just figure out what you want to accomplish, like figure out what the there is, and then whatever, like, tools you need or whatever your process is to make it happen is fine. I think I was just so married to this idea that there was a way that I should be doing things, or that however I was approaching things was never going to be the right way. I had to really kind of push through this, like, it sounds really, like, woo-woo and weird, but I just had to really push through that. That was this huge impediment for me. And again, that was something that mail art helped me with a lot, because there's so much freedom, and it's so divorced from these capitalistic ideas of production. It kind of exists to subvert all of that. You know, I do a lot of my artwork sitting on the couch with a lap desk watching VHS tapes.
Perfect.
because I've found that things that have the ads interrupt me too much. But if I put a VHS tape in, I'll stay put for the whole time. And something about even, like, that is kind of a ritual. Like, you were talking about ritualized, like, even, like, coffee drinking and eating and stuff. That is a way for me to get myself to, like, stay in one place and really focus for, 40 minutes to an hour and a half, without feeling like, oh, I have a million other things that I need to be doing, and, like, where do I start? It's like a weird tool.
Yeah, and I imagine at the end of the tape, it's not like Netflix where it just plays something else. Like, there's this imposed silence at the end.
Yeah, and it helps me set goals sometimes, like these daily collages that I've been doing. I'm going to see how much of today's collage I can get through while watching this Depeche Mode tape or whatever.
Yeah.
So that's fine.
I love it. Like, I hate phone timers and those things that's like, we'll lock you out of your phone until you do XYZ. My imagination just takes me down a path of, like, but what if I need to? Like, what if my state changes? And I think Depeche Mode tapes are a much cooler way and a much more self-forgiving way to set those timers.
Kind of the phone timer thing, that's kind of, like, punitive.
Right,
it's
yes.
kind of like, you're doing something bad, you're doing something you shouldn't be, by being on your phone, get back to work.
Yeah.
That's how it feels to me. I don't like that stuff either.
Whereas Depeche Mode, you're treating yourself.
It's all about Dave Gahan's different hairstyles and all the fashion choices
Good.
that were made. Just, I guess finding my VHS approach to different, whatever the equivalent is, in different parts of my life has helped me a lot. Should we move on to another question?
Sure. I am super interested in Archie's other question that we put in this section. What do you do when you realize your work isn't helping you cope, but maybe escape? Where's the line? But that's it's a pretty serious question, and I don't want to make you answer it or necessarily make yourself vulnerable. Just personally, for me, the line between coping mechanism helping you cope with something that is bad, but then being a tool that you maybe take to a situation where it doesn't quite fit, where it's maybe helping you escape or create more problems, is something I think about a lot. Like I said before, I'm a really solitary person. I don't work a lot with other people, and a lot of my work is coping with my alone time, like a classical Midwestern, what do I do in the winter when I can't go anywhere? I'm going to make some stuff, and it helps me maybe keep my mind off of things that I don't need to go down thinking, like stuff that I can't affect. But then a lot of times will end up maybe almost being a tactic of avoidance. I have this thing that I have to do, but I actually have to work on my own thing because I got to get it out by the end of the month. And so I'm going to avoid this more stressful thing that I'm supposed to deal with. They say, where's the line? And I don't know if I found that line yet.
I found this question really interesting, and I've always struggled more with my creative work being a tool by which I hurt myself and cause myself a lot of pain. I didn't consider before how it sometimes is escapism from maybe other things that you need to take care of or that you don't want to do. Or seeing other people, socializing because you are focused on XYZ. There is, I do that a little bit.
Yeah.
What's hard for me is, my brain has kind of changed a lot in the past few years. Not trying to overshare it. I don't want to go, too far into it because who cares, I guess. But just for context, in 2015, I left a really abusive relationship. And in the course of that relationship that I was in for 6 years, I ended up with PTSD, which happens sometimes. And I've noticed since 2015 a lot of interesting ways that my brain functions much differently than it did before. And so there was a lot of my life that I kind of just stopped feeling like I was able to do, see people and do things outside of the house and stuff like that while I was kind of navigating a lot of more serious symptoms. And so I think that maybe my artwork became a way to cope, but also escape from some of those feelings and some of those new realities about my brain.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't have a great answer for that one. It's a really good question, but I think I would need to. That's one that I might have to think about for a few more days before I really had an answer to it. I don't know. It's kind of a challenging one.
Yeah, and I think, we talked about earlier about not doing new stuff out of fear of failure. And I think, if I am using a consistent release schedule just for my own to cope with, avoiding being depressed, to kind of help me keep my thoughts in healthier spaces or productive spaces, but then I do start using that schedule as a reason to avoid meeting new people or trying a new thing because I'm afraid. I think that then gets into that avoidance or that escapism. And so I think, again, I wish I had an answer, but it's just more sympathy for people that have gone through this, because I've definitely gone too far one way and then too far the other. My life is just always that kind of pendulum and trying to find the middle space.
Yeah, that's a really interesting way of putting it. And I would say, I don't think I would have been able to verbalize it so well, but I feel that kind of pendulum, seeking the middle space, that really resonates with me also. While you were saying that it just occurred to me a good example of this in my life would actually be my relationship to mail art, which is very, very, I guess that actually probably is kind of my escapism and a weird coping mechanism that's not always the best. But it was when I lived with my abusive ex, there were a lot of issues with surveillance, and my P.O. box that I had in a different city where I worked, that they really did not have access to, became the place that I was kind of like almost preserving the person that I was, because the abuse was very severe. And so that became like my escapism and a way for me to like interact with the outside world in ways that were both healthy and unhealthy, I would say. And so when I moved back to Minneapolis, I had a lot of trouble getting involved. This is when I lived in North Carolina. That's when I got involved in mail art. When I moved back to Minneapolis, I had trouble with it for a little while because I just remember thinking, I don't know how to create mail art if I'm not under like severe duress, basically. Yeah, it kind of was like an unhealthy and healthy coping thing. There's like definitely, there are worse things, I suppose, that I could have been doing and getting involved with, like international like art exchange stuff. I had to kind of put it on the back burner and not participate in it for a while because I would just like flip out, just like internally, and cry and like do weird stuff when I would try to work on like mail projects. And then when I got back into it in a more like regular way rather than just an incidental one, because I kind of like backburnered it for a couple years. That was right before the pandemic, and I would have to look at my mail log, but I think that I've sent out like 650 things
What?
in the past couple months. So it can definitely be like a weird compulsion at times to participate in these activities. But when the Lake Street post office burned down during the Minneapolis uprising at the end of March, which also was your post office, that's where I had my P.O. box and I was doing my mail activities out of. I like lost it about the post office specifically. Like I had already lost it about like I was
right.
Everyone was very stressed out and very everyone was grieving, and I don't mean to say that to imply that I wasn't reacting to anything else that was happening, but there was something so specific about seeing that post office burn down, because I watched it on like a live feed as it was happening, just thinking about the impact that it was going to have, and also just sort of like the personal reasons why mail is important to me, and kind of all of the emotions that I have tied up in being involved in mail art and other things, and how big of a part of my life that is, and how big of a part of me that is, was really, I didn't really do any mail stuff for like 2 months. I don't know. This is probably not a story that should make it into the final cut. I guess I could tell it.
No, but I think what you were saying just about like you did this thing that was so important to you, kind of getting away from this really difficult time in your life, but it became so inextricably linked with that difficult time. I think that's really insightful and important. And then like having to take time away from that, I think that's the answer to Archie's question. What do you do when you realize your work isn't helping? Like sometimes you got to take a break, and sometimes that can be hard if you've internalized this like I have to make stuff.
Oh yeah, kind of related to what we were just talking about. Zome, or Bixling R on Instagram, asked, how does depression, anxiety, and general crisis exhaustion affect your creative process? What are your methods for getting out of a pit of despair and making art? We've kind of talked a little bit about this, but I was really curious, Erin, to know about whether everything that's been going on in the world with the pandemic and other factors, everything that's been going on in our city, in Minneapolis, how that has affected or not affected your ability to create, or strategies about consistency or your patterns.
Initially, I have still continued to work throughout all this, but I absolutely lost a month. The nice thing about putting out a monthly zine is that it's kind of, it serves as a track. You can look back and see what you've done, and I am just now a month behind because during March and April, I just could not get as much work done. And that's fine, I guess. A depressed person, like on and off in my life, have been like medicated and in therapy and hospitalized for it. And so that has been something that I've had to work against, and also a reason to find ways to work. I think I love the question, what are your methods for getting out of a pit of despair? Because I feel like part of my method is like, I live there. I plan for the worst case scenario. I have built my office into the pit of despair so that while I'm down there, I can at least get some stuff done. It's just like almost and this also gets back to the coping stuff too. Like everything I have done, I do for myself, assuming the worst, but keeping it flexible enough that I can still use it, do it, whatever, when I am not in that state of mind. The cartoonist Daryl Ayo tweeted something once about like, he's always depressed. He just makes sure every day he gets up and does the easiest parts of his creative work. And that's just the scale that he imagines himself working on, is that like, you just do the tiniest, easiest bit every single day, and eventually you will get something done. And so my office is in the pit.
That also resonates with me a lot. Sorry for laughing. It was just
no, I mean it's meant to be funny. It's a.
You articulated it, but I feel that very deeply. I'm also a very depressed person. Like my baseline is, I think, a good deal lower than a lot of folks, and that's fine. It's just the way it is. I think it's been that way most of my life, and I think I've also kind of built my office in the pit. I really like the way the cartoonist that you quoted put it. Yeah, you have to be able to show up to do the easiest parts, or if you can find a way to show up to do those parts, it will get done eventually. And I think that's part of the kind of like breaking it into pieces that are like more digestible or doable. I had a pretty like low point over the summer after the uprising. I was having some mood fluctuations and was very stressed out.
Oh.
And I really just wasn't able to work on a whole lot. But come August, I was like, I got to get myself back into working on things more regularly, because the various benefits I see from that, both creatively and just mental health wise, are so important. Just trying to show up for myself. Some of the work that I've done has been not that great, maybe not up to my standards. But there is maybe an idea there or something new that I've tried that's interesting, and that making that commitment to myself to share what I'm working on has been really good for my process. But I also have gotten feedback from people who are in kind of my creative network. Just showing up and being part of that community every day has also been valuable in some way to others. So it's just not realistic to think that everything you do is going to be, worth writing home about, so to speak. But I feel like I've also done some stuff in the past couple months where I've really pushed my work forward in pretty significant ways because I've shown up every day. And
I feel like what you're saying about making a lot of bad stuff and then finding the gems in there, to me, is like the thesis or the juice of this whole discussion. Like, I do the same thing, where I will put out a year of work and I will not love a lot of it, but then I can go back and find the things I did love and often pull those out and reassemble them into a denser, smaller thing that is closer to my standards. And I would not have made those linkages and made those things that I really like if I hadn't worked through and made the stuff I didn't like as much. And so learning to understand that when I sit down and make something, even if I quote-unquote finish something, that's not the end of that process. And it's okay to feel like something's finished and then go back and be like, actually, most of it's not good. I remember when I first started printing zines, like I was literally printing them on a black and white printer and just like stapling them in the corner, and they looked stupid. But you know, a few months later, I kind of retooled it and laid them out in a different way, and they still weren't great. But then, you know, another year later, I gave myself permission to do it again and to really try to learn to do more kind of layout stuff with that process. And it got to a point where I really liked them, and I had a finished thing that I did feel good about putting out in the world.
Yeah, interrogating your own work and your own processes, and not necessarily, it doesn't have to be a negative thing, but just being willing to be in conversation with yourself is a big part of this. And I think, especially in American culture, there's this like idea that creativity and like artistic genius is innate and that you don't have to work to get there. That some people are just brilliant, and that's how it is, as if like editors don't exist, as if
right, or as if like the great men in history didn't have maids and wives and moms working for them.
Right.
You know,
like like artists, like men, famous male artists, who had their wives or partners as basically assistants, and they never really get their due, you know? I really bought into this idea that to be good at what I was doing, I had to have some kind of innate, like, talent for it. And that you know, people who are good at something don't make mistakes. So I'm not really sure why I internalized that the way that I did. It actually is pretty hard for me to share what I do publicly. When I was younger, I used to destroy a lot of the stuff that I made. Like, I would throw it away. Because, I mean, some of that is just being a teenager and figuring yourself out. But, you know, it was so motivated by, like, I shouldn't do it. But when I was dating the person in my late 20s who was very abusive towards me, it was almost like having a mirror reflecting back all the worst things that I would say to myself. And that was awful, but it kind of made me realize how unfair I was being to myself. Because they would say to me, your art's not worth anything. No one cares about it. And you shouldn't make it. And that made me think, is that true? Because this is also something that I'm really passionate about. It almost took, like, being confronted by something so awful to make me think about, like, challenging it in my own life, which is kind of messed up. I'm not saying that it happened.
Right.
I'm saying that it's just kind of interesting how we internalize these ideas. But then I think about artists and musicians that I really respect or who inspire me, and it's the stuff. It's like their notebook stuff and the rough takes and the sketches. All that stuff is so fascinating. Can you talk about the positive and negative impacts you've seen or felt in your work and creative processes when you've had lapses in consistency? That's from Kathleen, the sticker.
Oh.
That's kind of I feel like we have danced around this a little bit, but we haven't specifically talked about it. It's kind of a hard...
You already sort of talked about the positive impact of taking a break from mail art, which I thought was really cool.
Yeah, I mean, I think it had both positives and negatives. I will say mail art is almost like my sketchbook. It's like where I have a lot of interesting ideas. That's where the interesting connections usually get made for me. It's very, very connected to my collage work, but it's not exclusive to collage. So I would say there's times where I've had to put that aside for various reasons. I would say if I had continued to do it, I probably would have pushed myself forward in different ways, but it's also fine because there were also some negative things that were happening. Are there times like that for yourself?
I really love to quit things. I give myself permission to quit things. Usually stuff like this, like the monthly zine, I will set a year. It's usually similar to a New Year's resolution, like I'm just going to do this for this limited time. And if I love it, or if it works out, then I'll keep doing it. When I have lapses in consistency, I mean, I'll occasionally beat myself up over it or feel like I should be doing better. It's dumb to beat myself up over that. And so more often, I'm generally having positive impacts from lapses. Like, I can quit a thing at the end of a year or earlier if it's not working out. And all the negative impacts have just been internal from me, and the positive impacts have been like pretty nice. And a lot of times I'll look back and, oh, I made this one good thing that I can hold up and carry forward, or, oh, I met this person who was doing something similar. But I think a lot of that also just comes from having had a schedule for so long and having had quit and failed at so many things. It can be sad in the moment, but then,
That makes sense. That's a good way of looking at it. I think I definitely have like a big failure complex that is something that I have to deal with. And I would say that I've gone from being like obsessed with my own failure to just being like in conversation with it, which is good. Because it being so afraid that I was going to make a mistake that I never do anything, to doing it and making the mistakes, more often than not. And now I move on and try the next thing, or it's clarified what I want to do in some other way.
Yeah, I'm also in a good mood right now. So you ask and I get this positive answer. But I feel like if you asked me in my worst times, I would not necessarily be so positive. I don't know that I want to even like try to contact that negative mental self of mine to try to give an answer.
We're in a good mood. Don't compromise it.
Right.
That's also a good point. I think I'm reasonably chipper right now. So if you ask me on a different day where I maybe was dealing with something else or whatever, just not in a good place, it probably would be a much different answer.
But
ideally, I try to find the good in it.
Yeah, and like you said, over the years, being in conversation with yourself, those negative times when I revisit them later, those negative impacts, those thoughts that I had, I usually find are coming from something else, some other problem, some economic stress, or some difficult relationships that I'm working through and stuff like that. And I can go, oh, that was not linked with my work at the time. Whereas the positive impacts often are.
Yeah, there's a pattern there that I think is really interesting, and I would say that it more or less applies to my life also. After I hit about 29 or 30, I think it started to get easier for me going forward to like not completely entwine all of that and be able to sort out different aspects of the good, the bad, the in-between.
Yeah.
And try to move forward.
As we're running out of gas, I think just thank you to the people listening, and thank you to the organizers of the Twin Cities Zine Fest. And I'm really hoping we can have an in-person festival next year.
Fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed.